The latest, Ellison.
Hi, John. A week ago, the White House gave Democrats a counteroffer somewhere in between $5 billion and $1.3 billion for border security and new wall construction. Administration officials won't say exactly what that number is, but sources tell Fox News it was around $2.5 billion. The White House says they did not hear from Democrats for days, and then they say Thursday night Democrats told them they weren't going to counter.
The Democrats offered us $1.3 billion for border security, but the border barrier. Keep in mind, everybody agrees at this point. Some folks use the term wall and they mean different things. That steel barrier that the president tweeted out, that's what he wants to build. The Democrats, believe it or not, don't call that a wall. They offered us $1.3 billion to do that. We countered with $5 billion. They came back at walking away from the table.
White House officials say they don't expect Democrats to negotiate in the near future, and they claim it is because of House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi, in fairness, does not have the votes for the speakership yet. She cannot be seen by her party as being weak on negotiating with Donald Trump.
She's more willing to protect that than she is to protect our borders and protect American lives.
Pelosi pushed back on the idea that votes in the speakership are putting her in a weak negotiating position during the Oval Office meeting with President Trump and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier this month. President Trump says he does not care what Democrats choose to call it, a wall or a fence, that he must have funding for some sort of physical barrier at the U.S.-Mexico border. And if he doesn't get it, he says he will, quote, be forced to close the southern border entirely. Meanwhile, the White House is trying to downplay the impact on federal workers.
We're in the middle of a government shutdown, and the ordinary pay cycle would pay folks today, and those paychecks are going out. It's the next payroll that's impacted will be January 11th. So,
but isn't that work for work they did before the 22nd of December?
It absolutely is. But again,
so the work they've done the last week right now, though, would theoretically not be paid, correct?
The folks who are really at risk are the folks who furloughed. Okay, the folks who are working are going to get paid. Period. End of story. When they get paid is a function of when the government opens up again. But they absolutely will get paid. No one works for free for the federal government. The folks who are furloughed, however, would need legislation in order to pay them for the time that they were furloughed.
In the past, lawmakers on Capitol Hill have passed legislation to give furloughed workers back pay, but there's no guarantee this time around that they would pass that sort of legislation. John?
Ellison Barber at the White House. Thank you. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen meeting with medical staff from our southern border in Yuma, Arizona today. It comes after a migrant child died in U.S. custody for the second time this month. Jackie Heinrich is in our New York City newsroom with more. Jackie.
John, Border Patrol made a series of changes since that boy passed away, including second medical checks on all children in custody. Secretary Nielsen traveled to El Paso, Texas, and Yuma, Arizona to see how medical screenings are being handled amid a spike in migrants arriving with illnesses and an unprecedented number of children and families. She called it a humanitarian crisis, but also laid the blame on the courts, saying Homeland Security is overwhelmed because of laws that encourage illegal border crossing. She pointed to the Ninth Circuit Flores settlement, a 20-year-old ruling that limits the time kids can be detained and sets conditions for facilities. The Trump administration wants to overturn Flores and keep families detained until their asylum cases are fully processed. President Trump blamed the Democrats for the child deaths, tweeting, "Any deaths of children or others at the border are strictly the fault of the Democrats and their pathetic immigration policies that allow people to make the long trek thinking they can enter our country illegally. They can't. If we had a wall, they wouldn't even try." But congressional Democrats are questioning how children are treated at Border Patrol facilities. Jacqueline Call McKean died of shock and dehydration in Border Patrol custody earlier this month. And 8-year-old Felipe Alonso Gomez died in New Mexico on Christmas Eve. The state medical examiner said he had the flu. Today, Houston Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee retraced that little boy's last steps and met with Border Patrol. She acknowledged understaffing and said there aren't enough facilities to house detainees once they're apprehended. She said an appropriate response would be to help Border Patrol with resources so children don't die in custody.
We don't have the infrastructure necessary to handle the humanitarian crisis on the front end when they are first taken in. That has to be fixed. All focus on a wall is not the solution.
Border towns like El Paso have been struggling to house undocumented immigrants after ICE released hundreds at bus stations. Legally, they couldn't be detained any longer, but agents had no post-release plans for them. John.
Jackie Heinrich. Thanks, Jackie. Sad news out of California for a family that fought so hard to bring a baby to the U.S. for medical help. 2-year-old Abdullah Hassan has died from degenerative brain disorder at an Oakland hospital. His mother, Shema Suela, was granted a visa and a travel waiver to fly to the United States from Yemen last week. After filing a lawsuit in federal court, she was able to say goodbye to her dying son. Citizens from Yemen are restricted from coming to the U.S.
to see how things might change on the ground once U.S. troops pull out. In principle, the ministers agreed to cooperate on the ground in Syria as U.S. forces prepare to pull out of the country. But this is a complex situation, with many players who now have a stake in the outcome of Syria's long-running war. The meeting follows President Trump's recent announcement to pull out all 2,000 U.S. troops currently in Syria.
President Vladimir Putin witnessed the test firsthand. He called the launch an excellent New Year's gift to his nation.
The new Avangard missile system is invincible for today's and future air defense systems and missile defense systems. This is a big success and a big victory.
Putin said his new missile will be deployed next year and will put the United States in his crosshairs. Putin wasn't the only one watching the Russian missile. U.S. officials say American spy satellites tracked the launch from space. Hypersonic missiles can travel more than 20 times the speed of sound, a challenge for current U.S. missile defenses. A recent report from the National Defense Strategy Commission, a group of military experts and retired senior U.S. military officers, warned America has reached the point of a full-blown national security crisis in any future battles with Russia or China, due to years of Pentagon budget cuts during the Obama administration. The scathing report also said the U.S. military is falling behind in developing new weapons. With respect to hypersonics in particular, the United States finds itself trailing China and perhaps Russia as well. All this raises the possibility that America may find itself at a technological disadvantage in future conflicts. One of the report's authors said President Trump must continue to spend more on defense.
We have to do 5 things at once. We need to be able to continue the fight against terrorism like ISIS. We have to deter Iran and North Korea. We have to continue to counter Russian aggression. And of course, we have to deal with the pacing threat that we face in a resurgent China.
Officials here say the best defense against Russia and China remains the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Over 1,000 warheads deployed in silo submarines and bombers throughout the world. If anybody took a shot at the United States, the response would be overwhelming. At the Pentagon, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News.
New details on the bombshell report that President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, might have met with Russian officials in Prague during the 2016 presidential election. What one of the journalists behind the story has to say. Plus, your New Year's weather forecast. What kind of weather can those who plan to stand in New York's Times Square expect when the ball drops at midnight? Tied to the Mueller Russia probe. Meantime, McClatchy is standing behind a report that President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, met with Russian officials in Prague during the 2016 election. This, as one of the journalists behind the report admits he has not seen some of the evidence firsthand. Jillian Turner has more.
McClatchy is standing by its reporting that claims Michael Cohen, President Trump's former attorney, traveled to Prague in the summer of 2016 to meet with Russian government officials on behalf of the Trump campaign.
Is there anything that you were able to actually physically see for yourselves?
I wish we had. We held out for a while for that, and there came a time when we thought we had a critical mass. It is a competitive business.
McClatchy's D.C. bureau reported Thursday that foreign intel agencies discovered a cell phone believed to be Cohen's, pinging cell towers in and around Prague during August through September 2016. They also report a European intel agency intercepted a conversation between Russians in which one of the participants mentioned Cohen was in Prague. Cohen punched back Thursday, tweeting, "I hear Prague is beautiful in the summertime. I wouldn't know as I've never been. Mueller knows everything." Cohen's been cooperating with the special counsel's investigation for months, and this report put him squarely back in the hot seat. If true, McClatchy's report lends credibility to claims made by British intel operative Christopher Steele in his now infamous dossier. Rudy Giuliani says the president is done with Mueller.
Over my dead body, but I could be dead.
The federal government also filed a sealed response Friday to an unnamed foreign company's fight to get the Supreme Court to weigh in on a mysterious grand jury subpoena rumored to be connected to the Russia probe. Nearly all the details of the dispute remain under seal, but sources have indicated to Fox News it involves special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Looking ahead to 2019, Rudy Giuliani claims Mueller's investigation is nearing completion, though independent analysts who've worked on previous presidential special counsel investigations tell Fox News they don't see the end in sight for at least several more months. John?
Jillian Turner reporting. Jillian, thanks. Dozens of yellow vest protesters targeting French media today. Demonstrators marched to the Paris headquarters of two French broadcasters, announcing plans to do the same at the offices of other television networks. Some members are accusing the media of favoring President Emmanuel Macron's government and minimizing their protests. Those began out of anger over fuel tax hikes and have been ongoing for more than a month. Parts of the U.S. are digging out ahead of the new year after powerful winter storms. Hardest hit were the northern plains, upper Midwest, and Southwest from Arizona to Texas. Now those storm clouds are moving east, bringing strong winds and heavy rain. AccuWeather meteorologist Erin Calandra is here with your weather outlook. Erin.
Well, John, the tail end of that front that brought us those soaking downpours on the East Coast yesterday it is still lingering here in the southeast. We will continue to see showers and storms in this location. It's adding insult to injury because we already have saturated communities in the deep south. So we don't need the rain, but here are some of the wettest years on record. In 2018, this is only a handful of the cities. We couldn't fit them all on the graphic because there are so many, but that includes Washington, D.C., Baltimore, State College, a close second for Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So it has been a wet one, and we're going to add more to those totals. We have another system developing. We're going to see moist air traveling through the Tennessee Valley into the Northeast for New Year's Eve. It's going to be a soaker in New York. We could see up to an inch of rain, so pack the poncho if you're heading to Times Square. The timing, well, during the day, it's going to be pretty clear in New York, but around 7 o'clock, that's when we expect to see that rain moving in, and it's going to be steady for hours. Right around midnight to 1 o'clock, that's when we could even see some heavier downpours. Now, the good news is, although it is going to be a wet one, it is going to be a much warmer one than last year for sure. Look at the East Coast, not bad. 60s, 50s, even in the 40s. A different story for our friends in the north central region. Fargo, 36 degrees below zero for the AccuWeather real field temperature. There's a whole formula for the real field temperature when it comes to cloud coverage, winds. There's a whole formula. That's how we get these temperatures, and it's going to be a cold one in the north central. Look at the difference. When we rang in 2018, the real field was 5 degrees below. This year, it's going to be around 45. So pack the poncho. It's going to be a wet one, but at least it is going to be relatively warm. Now, on New Year's Day, we have a high pressure system dominating. That's going to bring down this cold air from the north. So widespread chilly temperatures in the southeast. Again, we're going to continue to see some rain. It's going to be pretty pleasant in southern Florida. Look at Miami. 83 degrees with some sunshine. In New York, we should be in the upper 30s this time of year, but it's going to be 60 degrees and sunny. The cold region again, north central, Bismarck around 2 degrees, Minneapolis at 8, but on the west coast, it's looking pretty pleasant in California. Nice bright sunshine in LA with a temperature of 61. Back to you.
Erin Calandra. Erin, thanks. 2018 brought another year of extreme weather to the U.S. As we prepare to ring in a new year, senior meteorologist Janice Dean takes a look back at Mother Nature's fury.
New Year's Eve revelers in New York's Times Square rung in 2018 amid temperatures in the single digits. But with the wind chill, the feel-like temperature was 4 below. It set the tone for what turned out to be a frigid, stormy winter. Remember the bombogenesis? Down south, typically warm areas like Tallahassee were hammered with dangerous freezing rain and covered in ice. Then temperatures skyrocketed in late February, reaching the high 70s and setting new records in much of the north and the Midwest. But what goes up must come down. Plunging temperatures led to a whopping 4 nor'easters in March alone. After the coldest April in more than 20 years, we had the hottest.
Trump's border wall plans. What will it take to get an agreement? And who stands to lose the most? Plus, reaction continues to pour in over the death of a California police officer as investigators say the suspect was in the country illegally. Christopher Bedford, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation, weighs in on that and more next.
We cringe in the Hispanic community every time this happens. And what is occurring here is that the righteous are paying for the sinners. Not every illegal is a criminal, but California dropped the ball.
Rebuffed by the Democrats in both the House and the Senate.
I can assure you that the Democrats, all of us in Congress and beyond, want border security. We want the money to be spent wisely in the most effective way possible.
So the finger pointing goes on. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill making no progress on the border wall battle that led to a partial government shutdown that continues tonight. I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour if you're just joining us. The shutdown now in its 8th day and still no sign of a compromise deal on the horizon. Neither the Senate nor the House is scheduled to vote until at least Monday. Garrett Tenney joins us now from Washington. Garrett.
Well, John, several top lawmakers now believe this shutdown could drag on for at least another week or two. Both sides are digging in, and there hasn't been any real progress over the last few days to end the shutdown. Capitol Hill has essentially been a ghost town. Most members headed home until the new Congress begins next week, and they are leaving it up to leadership to work out a deal. But so far, Democratic leaders are refusing to negotiate with the White House, and Republicans are placing the blame squarely on Nancy Pelosi.
She has been too busy trying to secure the votes to become the Speaker of the House, and not enough time spent securing our border. And while she may have the votes, it's a thin majority if she does, and she's not going to cut any deal with Republicans until she has that speakership secured.
Democrats are expected to attempt to move a bill to fund the government next week after they elect a new speaker on Wednesday. That bill is not expected to include funding for the president's wall, though, which is why a number of top Republicans expect this shutdown to last for a while. Democrats argue, though, that President Trump only has himself to blame for the shutdown and for not getting his wall.
Unfortunately, President Trump has been hard to negotiate with. If he had listened to us and actually negotiated with us 2 years ago, he would have had $25 billion for a wall, and we would have had the DREAM Act. Instead, he ended up listening to the worst elements of his cabinet, as well as some pundits that basically guide his decisions.
This next week, hundreds of thousands of government workers will head back to work or stay home, and they won't get paid. Museums are set to close this week, later this week as well. So while Congress hasn't faced much pressure to make a deal over the holidays, that will likely change as folks feel the impact of the shutdown more and more as time goes on. John?
Garrett Tenney in Washington. Thanks, Garrett. Meanwhile, a new migrant caravan reportedly is preparing to make the journey from Honduras to Mexico. An estimated 15,000 people said to be taking part. Advocates say they plan on looking for work in Mexico because of the gridlock at the U.S. border. For more on all of this, let's bring in Christopher Bedford, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation. I wanted to touch on something that Garrett was talking about there at the end of his live report. You know, that in this holiday week between Christmas and New Year's, a lot of people are off. They're staying home. They're not, getting outside a whole lot. And a good many Americans probably haven't noticed the partial government shutdown. But that's going to change after the new year rolls in, isn't it?
Probably, and it's largely up to the president how much he wants to make Americans feel the shutdown. So the president can decide if he wants to, for example, like President Barack Obama did, barricade off the World War II monument, or close parking lots, or tape off fences in parks, or remove water handles from bike path water fountains. Or he can decide to not do that. But there are a couple of harsh realities that this president will run up against, which is, for example, the museums closing. The Smithsonian's are extremely, extremely popular with the American public. If it starts to affect some of the parks, or federal employees by the tens of thousands don't get their paychecks on January 11th, then there's nothing else. There's no more optics to it, and Americans will start to feel a little bit of the pinch.
They're going to blame somebody. The question is who? Do you have a good handle on that?
Polling indicates that they'll blame Republicans and the president. The question is whether or not that really matters politically. There's a lot of those kind of polls that go out, like people blamed this person for the shutdown, or people approve of prayer in school based on this amount. But the question is whether or not they vote on it. And cynically speaking, both the president, Republicans, and Democrats all over Washington have 2 years of people to forget in order before there's another election. And with the news cycle moving as quickly as it does, what people will more likely remember is if their Democratic representative who they sent to resist voted to fund a wall, or if the president they sent to build a wall didn't get one built.
Yeah, the president enjoys a 45, maybe 46% approval rating right now. Not exactly great, but Congress is at 20%. So it would seem that members of Congress have the most to gain from coming to some kind of an agreement.
Depends on which party you're in. So the Republicans, the Democrats right now have basically nothing to gain from giving President Trump his border wall. The dysfunction seems to be being blamed on the Republicans, being blamed on President Trump. And if Nancy Pelosi were to make some kind of deal with the Republicans, then she may not even win her speakership election, which has been floated as one of the reasons that she's been hiding out, been kind of quiet. Whereas Chuck Schumer may have more of a reason to go and make a deal with Republicans, as President Trump suggested last week he was willing to do. In the end, the Democrats were sent there to resist, not to compromise, and that's the kind of the feeling of the American people right now is very divided.
Well, Democrats take over the House of Representatives next week, presumably with Nancy Pelosi at the helm. If they pass a new spending bill, presumably without money for the wall, then it goes to the Senate, and that's not going anywhere in the Republican-held Senate, is it?
Not at all. Mitch McConnell has no reason to push it through. It would simply cause trouble between him and the White House. The president would veto it unless they got to a veto-proof majority, because he's the one who's going to be facing all the embarrassment. And then it's going to go back to a compromise where they have to reach one. One potential thing that was floated by one of the guests that you put on before in an old clip is whether or not the Dreamer Act or something like that could be attached to this, whether there could be some kind of compromise to tie illegal immigrants who are brought here as children to this. You can start to stack things onto these bills to make it unbearable to vote against it, but a clean funding bill is very unlikely right now.
I want to play some sound from Tom McClintock. He's a Republican member of the House Budget Committee. And while Democrats and Republicans are pointing fingers at each other, some House members, like McClintock here, are pointing fingers at the Senate and its processes. Listen.
The House passed a funding bill that included funding for the border wall and all of the funding necessary to keep all aspects of the government open. It stopped dead in the Senate because of the Senate's cloture rule, which I think is the heart of the problem. I don't blame Chuck Schumer for abusing that rule. I blame Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans for refusing to reform it.
But it doesn't sound like Mitch McConnell is going to budge on Senate rules.
No, unlikely. Harry Reid budged on Senate rules, and because of that, allowing for the nuclear option on court confirmations, the Democrats have lost a huge amount of judgeships to Mitch McConnell. That's been his major accomplishment. He only needed 51 votes to get that. So they know that the whole point of the Senate is to slow down the House of Representatives, which basically governs on mob rule. If you have one more person than the next, then you win. The Senate has to get to an area of compromise where you need those 60 votes. I don't expect the health of the Senate to last the next 20 or 30 years the way it was designed by our founders, but Mitch McConnell doesn't want to be the person who destroys it.
All right. Christopher Bedford from the Daily Caller News Foundation. Christopher, thank you.
Thank you.
Meantime, President Trump signing an executive order freezing pay levels for federal employees in the new year. Lawmakers and the military are not affected. The president has previously said the government cannot afford to give workers raises. The National Treasury Union slamming that move, accusing the president of pouring salt in the wounds of furloughed workers. Meantime, the House of Representatives getting ready to swear in more than 90 new members next week. That's a lot of new faces and names to keep track of. And our own senior Capitol Hill producer, Chad Pergram, is hard at work.
As a kid, I used to collect these, poring over the names and faces for hours, memorizing entire rosters of the Cincinnati Reds, the New York Mets, the Baltimore Orioles. We don't have Congress cards on Capitol Hill, but perhaps we should. After every election, I cram, studying pictures and bios, trying to learn members of the freshman class. It's not easy. Everyone recognizes New York Democrat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But who can pick out West Virginia Republican Carol Miller? Or if you're really good, know that Michael San Nicolas will be the new non-voting delegate to Congress from Guam, presuming you even knew there was a non-voting delegate to Congress from Guam. Granted, some freshmen are better known than others. Look familiar? That's Indiana Republican Greg Pence, brother to Vice President Mike Pence. Or how about Florida Democrat Donna Shalala? She served 8 years as President Clinton's Health and Human Services Secretary. Can anyone truly master the names and faces of the entire House?
I'm not sure I know all 435 of the faces now. I know all the Democrats because I deal with them on a regular basis. But frankly, there's some Republicans get up and speak who don't speak very often on the floor, and I nudge somebody and say, who is that? So, you know, it takes time. It's like being in a high school with 500 people, 430 people. You know, it takes you time to learn who they are, and you only do it really by association.
New York Democrat Joe Morelli is a freshman, but has an edge when it comes to learning everyone's names. The House swore in Morelli early after he won a special election.
Yeah, I have a cheat sheet on my desk, a book of all the pictures and names. And what I'm trying to do is, say hello to a group of people each day, learn a little bit about them that triggers things in my mind that will hopefully be helpful in terms of working together.
This is the House Freshman Directory from 2014. Lined up together are pictures of then freshman Mike Bost of Illinois, Rod Blum of Iowa, David Young of Iowa, and Bruce Poliquin of Maine.
It's really easy to tell me apart from the others. I'm the best looking and I'm always smiling. It's the only thing you need to know about life.
It's easier to tell them apart once you see them in person. Blum is tall and often wears a pocket square. Poliquin is shorter. Congressional leaders have an advantage of learning who's who compared to the rank and file.
I campaign with them. I'm in fundraisers with them. I'm on the street corner with them or knocking on doors. And so I get to know them. But it's really a chore for members who don't do that kind of campaigning with them.
Still, freshmen, like most freshmen, are sometimes afterthoughts, be they in high school or in Congress.
There's 435. Someone was joking with me. He was a senior member of the House. He said, I don't try to get to know names until they win their second term. And so maybe some people will start to learn who I am now that I won my re-election.
Learning more than 90 new House members is easy compared to the challenge posed in 1895. That year, voters sent a record 178 freshmen to Washington, the largest freshman class of all time. On Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, Fox News.
The governor-elect of Illinois preparing to take control of a state facing a massive budget crisis. The proposal he's floating for unfunded pensions there. Plus, a heated lawsuit prompting a school district's controversial new policy on saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
You shouldn't be arrested for exercising your right of expression, and you certainly should not be expelled from school.
I think it's a victory for the Constitution, for the First Amendment, and this is not Russia. We still have our rights.
Breaking news tonight on the Fox Report. Authorities say they have captured an inmate who escaped from California's San Quentin prison the day after Christmas. Authorities apprehending Shalom Mendoza at a Taco Bell this afternoon, about 200 miles south of the prison. He's also suspected in a carjacking in a Home Depot parking lot. Officers found that vehicle abandoned not too far from the restaurant. The third largest school district in Texas says students do not have to participate in the Pledge of Allegiance as long as they have permission from their parents. The move comes as a result of a legal settlement between the district and a student who was expelled for sitting during the pledge. Further details of that settlement remain under wraps. A political battle leading to a budget crisis in Illinois as the Republican governor and the Democratic-led state houses have accomplished little over the last 4 years, leaving the budget unbalanced and the taxpayers facing a huge burden. Now a Democratic governor is coming in. So will things change? Mike Tobin takes a look.
The state of Illinois is controlled by the Democratic Party. The last 4 years saw a Republican governor, Bruce Rauner, who was criticized as ineffective and dominated by Democrat majorities in both houses. In November, he was defeated by Democrat J.B. Pritzker, a political newcomer. With veto-proof supermajorities in both houses, the Democrats' hold on power in Illinois is absolute. So are the problems. The budget has not been balanced since 2000. Illinois has a backbreaking unfunded pension obligation, currently at $133.5 billion. It should grow roughly $3 billion per year and consumes more than 25% of the state budget. Illinois has a credit rating just above junk bond status, the worst of any state in the nation. Fitch Ratings says that boils down to a lack of coherent fiscal policymaking over many years.
We haven't had politicians who are looking in the medium or long run what we can afford. They've been getting elected by making promises without any money in the bank, essentially.
A spokesperson for Governor-elect Pritzker says the transition team has assembled a budget and innovation committee. One proposed plan would step up our pension payments now, allowing the state to level out its future obligations. To pay for it, the incoming administration is talking about new revenue streams, casinos and sports betting, recreational pot. Pritzker campaigned on the promise of switching Illinois from a flat tax of 4.9% to a graduated tax that puts a greater burden on the wealthy.
The incoming administration, quite frankly, is all Democrat, and the only thing they're talking about is raising your taxes.
Even with a Republican governor, Illinois saw sales and income tax increase. Outmigration from Illinois has doubled since 2011. It is now estimated that a permanent resident leaves Illinois every 4.5 minutes.
People need to look at Illinois as an example of how not to proceed in the future.
Democrat State Senator Greg Harris says Illinois needs to take advantage of programs with federal matching funds. He says without new federal money, Illinois cannot balance its budget in a sustainable way. There is not much discussion about cutting spending. In Chicago, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
A last-minute bid to save Sears after the iconic retailer announced it was closing dozens of stores. Details on that deal coming up. Plus, it's been a roller coaster ride for global markets this year. Maria Bartiromo gives the top 2018 business highlights next. Sears is saved from liquidation, at least for now, after an 11th hour $4.4 billion bid made yesterday by the company's chairman, Eddie Lampert. It will keep 50,000 Sears workers on the job, at least for the time being. Sears filed for bankruptcy protection back in October. The iconic department store has since announced plans to close more than a third of its 700 locations. It's been a whirlwind year for global markets, from the trade battle between the U.S. and China to a difficult 2018 for major brands like Facebook. Maria Bartiromo takes a look at the year in business.
The year in business will likely go down, remembered mostly for how it's ending, with head-spinning moves in the stock market and uncertainty gripping the globe. The stock market rocked with wild moves up and down. But sadly for investors, it's been more down than up. In Europe, Brexit on the brink.
I continue to believe that we can leave with a good deal and that this is it.
Paris in pieces. Citizens rioting over a new gas tax designed to curb carbon emissions. All this as America's economy is humming in ways not seen in years. The president's tax plan kicking in January 1st, helping to send second quarter GDP north of 4%, and the unemployment rate all the way down to 3.7%.
The fact that a business can write off 100% of an investment is an enormous incentive to get people to make capital investment, and that capital investment creates more jobs.
Blue-collar workers having their best increase in many, many years. The American economy is crushing it.
But the euphoria faded by mid-year as the president's America First policy meant renegotiating old trade deals. President Trump telling me in April that the United States will not back down until it has better terms with the rest of the world, notably China.
Are you going back down on the tariffs against China?
No. China wants to make a deal. And so do I, but it's got to be a fair deal for this country.
The administration calling out China over IP theft, the forced transfer of technology, spying on Americans, and lopsided protectionist tariffs. But while doing so, global growth worries persisted. President Trump also calling out his own Federal Reserve chairman for raising interest rates.
I think the Fed is making a mistake. They're so tight. I think the Fed has gone crazy.
Higher rates and the China tensions roiling the equity markets by year's end, with a big hit in the fourth quarter. The business world also still roiled by the Me Too movement, including media mogul Les Moonves of CBS, fired and deprived of a massive severance package after an investigation uncovered years of alleged sexual harassment. It was also a year of big challenges for big tech.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility. It was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
The Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal revealed that Cambridge Analytica took the personal data of millions of people's Facebook profiles without their consent, and it was used for political purposes. Facebook stock taking a beating, and others, such as Google, under the microscope for privacy issues, leading to calls for tighter regulations. 2018 saw a big change for the internet that few noticed. Net neutrality was repealed by the Trump administration. Despite promises of doom, the internet seems to work the same as before. But it is not the same as before for believers of Bitcoin. A year ago, the cryptocurrency riding high near $20,000, but by year-end crashing below $5,000. The year-end midterm elections set the tone for the year ahead with new uncertainty with the Democrats in the majority in the House, creating new questions over what can get done legislatively.
I am proud to shut down the government for border security.
2019 begins with a new Congress and a divided government. That traditionally has been good for business and the stock market. No wonder the list of IPOs ready to launch is growing. But the U.S. will need to ratify the new trade deal with Mexico and Canada, as well as finish its work with China, among other things. And in this era of a non-traditional president where business and politics overlap, you can be sure that more surprises are in store for the new year. Maria Bartiromo, Fox Business Network.
And as we get ready to count down to 2019, New York City's Times Square has a dress rehearsal. We'll tell you what happened coming up.